This is testing the audio to check everything's working. Testing, testing, just seeing if you can hear. Testing one more time. Stopping testing. Okay, welcome everyone. And here we are again at the International Learning Design Challenge, beginning to broadcast. And I'll just go through the outline of what we're going to be expecting to do today. So on the first PowerPoint slide, you should be able to see that we're going to be going through a sample review. So we have some reviews which we collected from the previous challenge, and we're going to take a quick look at what that looks like. Then go to the learning design challenges which are collected on the Padlet wall, and look at some of the learning designs which have been submitted, which we think could address some of those challenges that you've had. There'll be an opportunity for online discussion and question and answers, comments, whatever you like. And as you can see, you can use the Q&A during the Google Hangout if you're on Google. You can come in via email. You can use the Padlet wall, Twitter, or, as I said, the Q&A. So we'll be monitoring those different channels. Obviously, it's great if you can come in on Google, and then we can have a bit of a conversation, either in chat or if you come in via audio. So let's begin by looking at the review, as I promised. And this is, if you go to the Learning Designer in the browser, there will be a list of submitted designs and reviews. And that's where I picked one of these out. So this is a review of an EU project on using the educational environment. And the aim of this particular design was to introduce the student to the pedagogical and technical basics of the EU project, networked learning activities. So here's a design. You can see there are four sections. So this is being achieved by getting them to go through learning in a global context, the EU project case, and then some activities on becoming a learner in a global context. So there's a produce activity, you've tried the online forum, now go and do your own experience, open an online forum with instructions for your students. Then there's a collaborate session, a game, and then they move into implementing evaluation tools for the global community. And then another collaborate session where they're working in groups again. And finally, reflecting on their own participation and making a contribution on their own personal log. So there's the final produce activity comes in there. Now, that's been reviewed. So the person who did this put in who was doing the review. So that's their username. They can be found in the list. And they've organized it according to the criteria that we mentioned in how to review a learning design. So there was whether there is a test of how well the learner has attained the learning outcomes. There's a consideration of alignment. Do the outcomes reflect the assessment, and does the assessment reflect the activities? What kind of feedback is there? How well is the technology used? And anything else the reviewer wants to propose. So you do this by, when you're in edit mode, you add a TLA, and this blank TLA will come up here, and then you can call it discussion or choose read or whatever you prefer. Don't put any duration in for the activity, because then that will affect the design. So this is where you put in. In this case, the reviewer has said, is there a test? Yes, there is both production and reflection throughout the design, and I assume that teachers provide some sort of assessment feedback on the production activities. The design could benefit from making the ways of assessment more explicit in the design. So there's appreciation, confirmation of one of the ways in which this is a good design, and also a suggestion for how it could be made better. On alignment, yes, there's clear alignment between the learning outcomes, the selected types of activities, and the production activities, which is how you test. On feedback, yes, I assume there is formative feedback from the teachers all along, but the design could benefit from making it more explicit. Do teachers provide feedback on the role play? How are participants doing? And how participants are doing? And they could provide that to the whole group, or do they provide it to individuals, and where do they do this? So in doing a review, it's a little like doing a review for a paper to a journal. You're pointing out what are the good aspects of this particular piece of work, and also making some recommendations for what could be changed or improved. And we found this to be quite an interesting process, because what emerges from this is that reviewers are talking about aspects of pedagogy which are important to them, particularly things like clarity, making clear to the students what they need to expect would be one element of how you make a pedagogical judgment. So in addition to feeding back on the particular criteria that we mention, reviewers very often put in some of their own points as well. I don't know if there's anything else on this. Yes, on this one, they've added the additional point. Learning time is smaller than design time. I also put some additional comments under the notes pages. So in here, there will be some additional notes from the reviewer. So if we look at the learning time here, the learning time was originally intended to be 240 minutes. The design time has come out to be 270 minutes. So that could be problematic. It's an important point to be aware of. I have to say, it very often happens that when you're designing, you get carried away and produce far too much stuff. So that's one of the ways in which this is a good constraint on what you do. So that's the way that a review looks when it appears to the reviewer, and then when that goes into your personal space, you can then provide a link to your review again back on the Padlet wall. So we'll be able to look at each other's reviews and then make a decision about the extent to which you want to change or update your own learning design, which of course is entirely up to you. That's you are in charge. So then going on, by the way, I will pause every so often and see if there are any comments or questions coming in. So do feel, if you would like to interrupt at any point, please do go ahead. Looking at our learning design challenges, if we go to the learning, the Padlet wall where people were collecting challenges, there's quite a few here. And what I've done is to pick out some of them, and I thought we might go through what some of them are about and see the extent to which the learning designs that people have come up with, which are on a separate wall, then insofar as we can look at those, we'll be able to see the extent to which some of those learning designs could, sorry, I need to be showing you this slide here. We can look at the extent to which some of the learning designs that people have contributed could be responses to some of the challenges. So just going through some of the challenges which are up there, John Cuthell suggests that one of the really difficult things about using the learning designer is estimating the learning time for activities. And yes, that is absolutely right. We all have that problem. And one of the important disciplines of having the learning designer like this is that it forces you to think, how long is this activity going to last? And in what sequence do I do things to make sure that the learner is using their time as efficiently as possible? Now, with that analysis and plan done in advance of actually running the design, whether it's online or face-to-face, gives you an opportunity to test it out in practice and see the extent to which your estimates worked, and then go back to the design in the learning designer and decide, well, maybe I should have changed the sequence perhaps, or I should have spent a bit longer on the introduction, or I should have given clearer instructions or something like that, so that you have the opportunity to go back and change some of those timings or change other aspects of the design that might have helped. So I don't think there's honestly, John, there's no way around this problem. We all find it very difficult to estimate how long is it going to take learners to do this. And in the old days when I was working with programmers on creating online materials and programs for students to use, I would always force them to come and watch students using their program with me, because they just couldn't believe that it could take students, for example, 10 minutes to work out how to log on. I don't think it's quite that bad these days, but in the old days it took ages. And it's very important for programmers to see the evidence of how hard it is to do some things, or to know how to interpret a particular screen, something like that. So there's no way around it. This is design, test, redesign. That's what we all do. And I think one of the virtues of having a learning designer is then you can record your experience in the notes. You might say something like, this might look like a long time for students to be doing X, Y, or Z, but we've tested it and that seems to be how long they take. So at least you're passing that experience on to other teachers. So I don't think I have anything more helpful to suggest than that at the moment, and would welcome any other reflections on John's interesting challenge. Then several people, Simon, Helen, Clodagh, Rick and Louise, were all talking about what are good designs for blended learning when you're trying to get together the best way to offer something which would be which blends what you can do in the face-to-face, whether it's in the classroom or it's a field trip or something like that, with what's happening online. And I thought for that I would show you something of what we've done in some of our courses. If we go to this one, for example, yes. This is a learning design for a Moodle course. It's primarily run on Moodle. This is about key issues and debates in education and technology. So there are several sessions here. Each one, every other one has a face-to-face classroom session. This is one of them which does that. This is the one on what can history tell us about education and technology. So there's an introduction. The study guide tells them what's in the resources. So it's saying, here's chapter 3, which is doing this, and consider these points, and here is chapter 3 to read, and then here is a discussion forum, and it's asking students to go and contribute to the forum. What lessons do you learn from this process, which they've just been through, for predicting future uses of technology in classrooms? So then they go to the forum, then there's an optional text, then they get an introduction to the next bit of the resources which they're supposed to look at. and then another forum. Then there's a writing activity, because this is often taken as one of the first modules. So students have a practice at critiquing a paper, and then they share each other's critiques and comment on each other's activity and so on. And this bit is the class activity. So this is for students who are working both in the class and also remotely. So it gives people who are working remotely access to a Collaborate session, tells them what time to start, and mentions it's UK time because after all, some of them are international. And then in class, there's going to be group activities where the students are working together on the activity for the week, where they have to work through some analysis of historical interpretations of technology and education. And the same activity is made available online through a Google Doc, where the online students can collaborate together. So students in the classroom are working around a table on a shared document to write down their analysis and their observations and so on. And the students online are doing exactly the same thing. And then in the second half of the session, they download the same slides that are run in the classroom session, work through those, and then again, there's on the same Google Doc, there's something where they can work together online, while what's happening in class is the same thing as is running in class. Because it's a Collaborate session, there's also a chat. So in just the same way as you have chat on the Google Hangout here, it's possible for those students to be having the online chat in parallel with the class activity. And then when the group activity is running in the classroom and all the students are working in small groups, it's possible then for the lecturer to go and look at the chat in the online session and see if there's any particular issues coming up and things to respond to. So it's actually quite hectic running this kind of thing, but it can be done. Of course, you don't have to run it synchronously. This is run synchronously because the course is running in dual mode, but you can just as easily have a Collaborate session where after a classroom-based activity, you have all of your students go into a Collaborate session a few days later, maybe, to collaborate on working out how they're going to work in their group. So there's a number of different ways in which you can use it. But so that's just one example of the way in which we might run a design for a blended learning session. So probably what I should do is make sure that that design for that session, or maybe part of that session, is put up as one of the samples in the curated designs. So what I hope will happen, oh dear, sorry about that. What I hope will happen as we move through developing more designs in the International Challenge is that we will be able to look at some of the things which people are contributing, which are combinations of bringing together the digital with the physical, or the online with the face-to-face, or the field activity, and some mobile devices being used as well, perhaps, so that we can look at a much wider range of designs for blended learning than we have already. Of course, in the Learning Designer itself, if we go to the browser and within the activities for under the curated designs, we've got both online and blended designs there. So if those of you who are puzzling about what are the good ways to show wholly online and blended designs, there are one or two in there which would be examples of that. Then coming to Chris's challenge, helping students relate practical work to theory. So this is where they have a very nice practice activity, and students actually love the practice activity. And the issue is to make sure that that activity ties up with the theory which they've already been taught. Very important aspect of learning design to try and make sure that at each stage, the student is being asked to reflect on something which they've already done, which is relevant to the task in hand, or something is feeding forward from the task they're doing now into something that's going to follow on in some theoretical way. And I think that's one of the nice things about the, let me just go back to the browser here, the discovery and then telling designs in the curated section on the Learning Designer. That shows very well the value of having the right kind of preparation task before you come to a lecture. When you've got the right kind of preparation task, the students are able to understand the lecture much better as a result of that. So that's one way of thinking about it. Another way, I thought we might look quickly at a MOOC that we ran earlier in this year, where we were using formative peer assessment to get students to do exactly that issue. So this is an example. It's an example page from a MOOC, which is called ICT in Primary Education, Transforming Children's Learning Across the Curriculum. And in the third week, reflecting on these different kinds of things they've been doing during the week, they're now asked to submit their own learning objects. So this was a practical session where at a previous stage in the week, they'd been asked to develop a learning object. Well, now they have to submit their version of the learning object and then review two other students' submissions as learning objects. And the criteria relate back very clearly to some of the theory which has been mentioned during the week, for example, on Bloom's taxonomy, and on the relationship between activities and resources and how that relates to the assessment rubric which is being used. So as they review, they're being asked to look at how good is the alignment, how appropriate is the learning outcome given the supporting references, how good is the use of the tool, and so on. So very similar to the kind of review that we're looking at in terms of our learning designs. And by doing that, they've already done this very nice learning practical activity of developing their own object. But now this part of the learning design is very clearly making them reflect back on the extent to which what they've done relates to the theory that they've already covered. So I don't know if that helps, Chris. I mean, it's one of the ways in which I think with the kind of practical work you have devised for your students looks extremely nice in that learning design. And I strongly recommend people go and take a look at that because it is a nice example. But the practical work should always be able to relate to the theory, and it should be very clear to students why it does, and it's up to them to work at making those connections. So I think that's one of the ways in which you could do that. Then I've also suggested that we look at Marianne's design, and I think that's here. If we bring that one up, because there was a nice example here. This is a design about relating or understanding the difference between fact and opinion. And so there's a process by which the students go through their own interest-led theme and start thinking about the concept of fact and opinion. And then they apply this concept to some particular web content, and then they produce a video showing their evidence of understanding of that difference between fact and opinion. So here's a nice way of getting them to put that theory into practice. So they've been through what the difference supposedly is. Now they've got to investigate some examples of video content, use a forum to discuss the direction of the project, what they might do, complete a short quiz, and then work through guided interactive steps to create a scenario for a video and script to submit to include the location, when and where, 4 points relating to concept of fact and opinion, and so on. So there's your nice practical activity, and it's relating very clearly to what they have supposed to have looked at in the theory. And then they consolidate that by actually doing a final version of the video and its script, and then sharing that with others. And that's something which, again, the teacher could mark for themselves if they wanted to see how well the students had addressed that problem. So I think marrying up the challenges that people are coming up with the designs that people are coming up with is quite an interesting exercise. If we have a look at some of the other challenges, let's have a look at a few more of these. And Victoria and Mariangela have both looked at judging students' attainment of learning outcomes and the alignment of the learning outcomes with what they're actually doing. Well, the important thing about the produce activities is that that's how you try to make sure that you as a teacher have the means to judge whether they have achieved the learning outcomes. Have you got the right alignment between outcomes and the produce activities? Well, that's a matter for design, test, and redesign again. I mean, this is an empirical process. We are treating learning design as a design science. It's trying to make it as good as possible, testing it out in the real world, namely, does it work with students, and then going back and redesigning and trying to get the best out of it. So I think remembering that the produce activities are the way in which you generate the means by which you as a teacher can judge how well students have attained the learning outcomes. That's one of the important things to remember. It doesn't just have to be that. I mean, you can do it also by looking at forums and where students have been discussing things, and you get a bit of a sense of it there. But of course, in a forum, there can often be a lot to read that isn't particularly well targeted necessarily at enabling you to judge whether they've got the point. You might sometimes be able to see ways in which they are neglecting things or maybe have misunderstood the point, but basically getting the students to produce what they think is the outcome of their learning as something quite explicitly a produce activity, that means it's much easier for the teacher to go and judge. So I've suggested looking at Lynn Taylorson's design here. So if we just go back to the Padlet wall and look at this one, and I think again there was a nice, we're looking at the opportunity to see what students are actually doing. Yes, a round robin summary of initiatives in their own specialist area with brief group discussion of any common theme. Sorry, I should have said this is about economic and political influences on your professional practice. So what we're looking at is the way in which you could judge what they've done from their 5-minute news reports. So looking at these, they're examining their knowledge of current hot topics, then they're investigating current news sector, and then looking at the priorities in the Sector Skills Council, and then having a plenary discussion, and then launching a home learning activity as well. But buried in here is this activity where they prepare an online briefing to feedback findings of your area's news review in the form of a 5-minute news headline report to the wider group, identifying common themes. Now that's an ideal opportunity for the teacher also to join that group, see what these 5-minute news headlines reports are. So the teacher might have quite a large number of students in the class working on something like this, but you've only got, well, they're in groups of 4 in this class of 30, so I suppose you've got 8 to look at then. And you could, in some cases, if you've got 8 students working on a 5-minute news headline, you might decide to combine them and have only combine them in pairs of groups and then get them to do something combined, so you've only got 4 lots of news activities to work through. But whatever way you can devise of enabling the students to prepare something for you as a teacher that is fairly straightforward for you to look through and say, yes, they've got it, or clearly they've missed this point, or clearly this wasn't fully understood by everybody, and then you can give some feedback to everybody. So that's one of the best ways, I think, that we assure ourselves that students are attaining the learning outcomes, is by devising exactly those kinds of activities. And then finally, Christina, Boyle-Sweetie, Lynn, Christine, and Marianne, we're looking at this issue of maintaining the human connection on the large scale, keeping students motivated, keeping people engaged, and that's extremely important. And I think one of the ways in which, oh dear, I keep doing that, sorry, one of the ways in which we do that is the idea of these peer discussions, peer group discussions, which are quite targeted, quite carefully orchestrated, so students know exactly what they're supposed to do. But by pyramid form, I mean the sort of thing I was mentioning just a minute ago, where you have maybe students begin by working on their own to answer a question, and then they work in pairs, to produce a joint answer to a question, and the pairs join up with another pair, and then the fours join with other fours, and so on, until you've got a smallish number of groups comparing and deciding how they're going to answer this question. Maybe you end up with 8 groups for a class of 40 students. You've then only got 8 things to respond to. You've kept all of those students engaged and interested because they've all begun by doing something on their own, and then they've been involved in a number of other discussions before they get to the point of saying, okay, this is what we think the answer is. And then everybody gets feedback on those 8 things which that whole group has decided on an answer for. So that's one way of doing it. There was a nice comment from somebody on making learning beautiful, and that's a very important thing to think about, especially when we're working online. There are all sorts of ways of making it beautiful because there's some beautiful design online. The problem is that we're all amateur designers, and making sure that we produce something that looks nice for students to use is extremely important. Some institutions have very good versions of Moodle which look great, others just look a mess. So the more that we can push people to help us make the design look beautiful, I think it's extremely important. So engagement is, it's possible to achieve that if you've got very carefully designed learner-directed activities. And I wanted to just look at a nice thing in one of Chris's learning design. We can get back to that on the Padlet wall, because there was a nice idea there, I thought. What's happened to it? Now this. In a quiz. Now this is a design about an introduction to modern control systems, and right at the start, I think they have to do a quiz somewhere. Yes, a questionnaire. What do you know about control systems analysis and design? So the lecturer is able to gauge the background knowledge of students joining the class. So that's a really important thing to do. But then later in the next session, which is the contact hour, the lecturer goes through the responses of the pre-class questionnaire. And in going through that, can obviously comment on some of the issues which have come up in what students have said, and enables each member of that class to see how they are in relation to others. You know, am I one of the very few who's inexperienced in this area, or are there lots of people like me? That sort of thing. But I thought what was really nice about that was the way in which the lecturer is responding to what the students are giving. So the students feel cared for. The more that students feel cared for, cared about, the more they will remain engaged with what you as a lecturer have to offer. So I thought there were some very nice ideas coming up in the on the Padlet wall, and let's see if we can just get back. Yes, and some of them do indeed answer the challenges. There will be any number of challenges, I'm sure. We could carry on generating lots and lots of those, but let's also remember there's some really nice design ideas coming up there as well. And in some cases, you may take a good idea that's just part of a particular design and take it out into a longer design maybe. So let's just pause there and see if there are any questions or comments coming in through any channel at all. If you're in Google, you can take the opportunity to join us. I didn't see anybody coming in on Q&A. Nothing coming through? No. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, I'll wind up the process by just looking at what's coming next week. Sneak preview. We've been looking in the first 3 weeks at what it takes to design something at the session level, where we're talking about a few hours of teaching and learning. In the final 2 weeks, we come to the course resource appraisal model, and that's what it produces, is what's on the screen you can see now. The output shows you for a whole term's worth, usually, or a semester's worth. It doesn't have to be that long. It might be just a week's worth, but generally speaking, this is where you're thinking about a whole module or something of that kind. And you're planning a number of different learning activities for students in much the same way as we have been with the learning designer. And as you build your design, it's showing you what kind of overall experience the students have. So that's quite similar to what the learning designer does. It also looks at the degree to which the experience is personalized. So students are getting some sort of feedback from each other or from a computer program or from a tutor. The extent to which it's social, they're working with other students, and the extent to which everybody gets the same. So video lecture, for example, would be the same for all. And then what kind of feedback does each learner get? And in this particular course, it was predominantly peer feedback, and there was a certain amount of tutor feedback as well, but no computer-based feedback. So depending on how you set up the design of those different activities, it will summarize all of that for you in this single chart. What it also does is to look at the teacher time. So it gives you a sense of, especially if you're working online, you very often get this very large amount of upfront preparation, which then the second time and third time you run it is just really updating or fixing problems, doing much less of the preparation because that's all being designed in the first time round. The support hours may well stay the same if student numbers stay rather similar. You've still got to go in and look at each forum, you've still got to reply to students' queries and so on. So that may well stay the same over several runs. This is modeled for a course which was running with initially 200 students and then 400 and then 800. And it's summarizing all the data you've put in about the total number of hours to prepare and to run the course or to support the course. Any data you've put in about the fee income from students and the cost of the teaching. So this is just teaching costs, doesn't pay any attention to technology costs or to the administration costs and costs of registration, all the rest of it. It's just for the teaching costs of the course. And so the way it gets all that information is that it's taken you through a number of forms of this kind. So in this one, we've already created the teaching and learning activity called digital simulation, which has that kind of overall pattern to it, that combination of learning types. It asks you for how many weeks and how many hours a week are the students using this. It then asks you to estimate how many hours each week it's going to take you to prepare this material. Now this might be running a digital simulation, a different one every week, or it might be the same one every week. If it's a different one every week, then you might put in hours per week. If it's the same every week, you might put in non-weekly hours because you only do the preparation once. And then you also have to decide, is this being done by higher cost staff or lower cost staff? And we just have those two values because otherwise it gets far too complicated. If you're trying to relate it to every salary level in the entire institution, then it just becomes, you lose the will to live, basically. So just as a rough estimate, is this going to be a professor or an administrator who's doing this kind of preparation? And then the same for running it when you're supporting students. How many hours a week do you support this particular activity? Is it per student, or is it per group, or is it per class? So the number of hours that you'll be supporting a lecture for a whole class would be the same number of hours as there are, how long that class is. It would just be a 1 hour lecture would be 1 hour to support it. But if it's a small group session, it's something like, let's say, a field trip where you take 6 students each time on a different trip, then that would be the number of hours it would take to support each of those groups, because you need a teacher for each group. So that's the way it works out, the total number of hours. And again, for high cost or low cost staff. So that's what's coming. When you've done it all, you get this kind of feedback. You look at the bottom line, you think, that's terrible, I'd better go and redesign it all. That's the fun of it. The two tools, the learning designer and the course resource appraisal model, don't actually interact with each other yet. They did once when we had an all-singing, all-dancing system, and that got quite complex to use. So we've separated them out into separable tools. They are about different stages of the design process. So we'll go into that in a bit more detail next week to show you what it would mean to actually try out a new way of designing a whole course over several weeks, preferably. So that's what we're coming to. Let's just see if there's anything coming through from any questions or comments coming through in the media.
Just unfortunately, the sounds seem to have got a little bit kind of tinny. I don't know if it's maybe the vibrations from the machine, or it just could be a digital thing. But otherwise, people seem very interesting.
Well, if the sound quality has got worse, I'm sorry. I don't know quite what we can do about that. But do carry on with the discussion. We can leave the broadcast running just in case any questions come into the group chat. So we'll just end with this slide here. And if you do want to carry on the discussion here, that's fine. But otherwise, we'll be monitoring the forums and the Padlet wall and so on. So I hope you enjoy the process of reviewing. It's a very interesting process for us because we see all these interesting comments coming through and the ways in which you think about someone else's design and trying to capture that into, so what are the theories that people have, the sort of the tacit theories very often about what makes a good piece of pedagogy. And what you'll be doing here is making it explicit. So then we try to capture those and give them back to reviewers for the future. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you in the various other opportunities for discussion. Thanks again.